Sage Wanderer here, and welcome to Coffee Talk! Today, we're going to talk about near-death experiences. Once again, Coffee Talk is for things I find interesting but don't necessarily believe. And it's kind of a big game of what if. And I have been looking forward to this near-death experience video for a long time. It's one of those things I've had on the back burner and never got around to. And so I've just completed several days of research into near-death experiences, and I'd like to share with you what I found out, and you can tell me what you think about it. Before we get started, I want to remind you I am a Christian minister, and this is typically where you find sermons, but on Fridays we have a little fun. We talk about what if, and it's always got a little bit of a God edge to it, and some of it's downright religious. Okay. But today we're talking about something that most people consider kind of new agey. Before I get started, if you enjoy Coffee Talks, you want to see them keep coming, please contribute to this channel. All of the money that comes to this channel goes to support my basic lifestyle of living in the cabin in the woods. And I don't have any luxuries. I have barely the necessities of life. And so I'm not wasting your money. And so if you like what you find here, please contribute. If you're a member of the Sheep Pen Ministry and you contribute, thank you for your contributions. You're keeping me going on a daily basis, and I thank God above for you on a daily basis, and I pray for you all. And but if you're an enjoyer of Coffee Talk and you don't watch the other parts, well, contribute with a little a love offering in the PayPal. There's a link in the description, or you can send me something in my P.O. box, buy me a cup of coffee or lunch or what have you. So let's get on with near-death experiences. So what I found interesting is, first of all, the sheer number of near-death experience stories you can hear simply by Googling NDE on YouTube. You can come up with all kinds of stories. And these range from woohoo, way out there, to more believable, to totally unbelievable. So the viewer beware, right? Use your discretion and your discernment. And what I found really interesting was not the differences between all of the NDE or near-death experiences, but rather the similarities that I found amongst all of them. And so in this video, I'd like to talk about the commonalities, the things that you find in almost all of these stories. And there does seem to be reoccurring themes. Now, a subtext to this is also defending your life. So that's the subtitle of this video, because there was a movie that came out, I believe, in 1991. Meryl Streep's in it, amongst others. Rip Torn, one of my favorite actors, puts in a great performance as the defense attorney. And so later on in the video, I will talk about that movie and its similarities with all of the commonalities of near-death experiences. So some of the commonalities, and you might have heard the stereotype, you know, the cliche, I moved towards the light, I saw a bright light, I went into a tunnel of light. Excuse me, I'm getting over some allergies and some crud from the spring. And I will find that the biggest variance in all of the near-death experiences are the very beginnings of it. The most common experience is people float above their bodies and they see themselves lying on an operating table or at the side of a crash, or where their body collapsed from a heart attack or whatever caused their death, as it were, and they hover over their own body. That's not all cases. Some cases, people simply close their eyes and they awaken on the other side. And there are variations of, once you get to the top of the room, some will see a portal open that resembles a stargate or a wormhole. And usually there'll be a spirit guide there, typically a dead ancestor, a dead grandmother, an uncle, somebody you knew in this life that knew you. And they're there to help you make the transition and make sure you go into the portal. I heard one researcher say that's how ghosts happen, when people miss their spirit guide and they run off and leave the room looking for their family or something, and they miss that opportunity and they get stuck here. That's conjecture, of course, since no ghosts have come back as far as I know. But everyone in these encounters always finds the proper portal or stargate to pass over into the next life. Now, many of you who are Christian types who have been scared with the mythology, I call it mythology at this point because according to this, to near-death experiences, hell doesn't exist. That's one of the commonalities, is that 99.9% of these experiences, they find out that there really isn't punishment, that because this life isn't about reward and punishment as much as this life is about learning lessons and growing as a human and becoming a better person. And I think that that is the commonality amongst all near-death experiences, with the exception of a few. I did search out near-death experiences that show you hell and demons and all of that. And what I did find was interesting, that the only reports I see of people having these negative hell experiences are people who committed suicide or were atheist. So if they were adamant atheist, or even I would consider God haters, or if they were, if they committed suicide to escape this life, some of those were shown hell. But that is a tiny percentage, and just for full disclosure, the only sources I found where near-death experiences talk about hell were on like the 700 Club and TBN and other mainstream evangelical Christian organizations who, as part of their religion, tend to focus on scaring you with hell on the regular. So that was the source of the ones. The overwhelming majority are going to be like what I describe here, a trip to the other side, an experience in heaven. So whether you float through the ceiling of your hospital room or whatever, and you find yourself teleported past the earth, looking down on the earth, out into space, those tend to look like hyperspace, where the stars just start to blur and you feel like you're being propelled to another place far, far away. Others tend to use this wormhole or cave or tunnel with a light at the end of the tunnel. But nonetheless, once you pass through, however you got there, you start to see some big similarities. Many people find themselves in a big, open, beautiful field. They describe colors that aren't present on Earth, colors that are beyond description. One person who was an artist who went over and came back said he identified 70 primary colors, and we only have 3 on Earth. So to say that the visions are spectacular is an understatement. And they're undescribable, apparently. And this usually is a big open field, and there's often other people there. And one of the things I found very interesting in the vast majority of these near-death experiences, at this point you might meet with ancestors, relatives, people that you know, or at least people that know you, even if you never met them, and they're all glad to see you, and they welcome you there. And then at some point, an angel takes charge. And, well, before I get into that, another thing that's also often present is you get to meet your pets. You get to meet your past pets. And it started getting me to thinking about all my past pets. And you've heard me talk about Einstein the Wonder Dog, my duck-tolling retriever that passed away at old age. And, you know, my little Yorkshire Terrier, BB, who actually appeared on this channel in some of the a couple early videos. And that, yeah, it would be really interesting to meet those pets. So I guess it's true, all dogs go to heaven. I heard one person say all your pets are there. It doesn't matter if it's a lizard or a bird or a fish, or you'll meet them all, and they're all anxious to see you. And some of the descriptions of seeing these pets are them acting like they do when you go away for a while and you come home after a long trip, and they're so happy to see you, and they're so overjoyed that this is how they are greeted by their pets. So I think that's kind of cool. I don't know. Maybe they were right. All dogs go to heaven. One of the things that gets confirmed in several of these is that humans have human spirits and animals have animal spirits, and there really isn't this idea that animals start out as animals and become humans, or that humans get demoted to animals. That is something that actually, if you study the lost years of Jesus, was one of the main arguments that Jesus had while traveling in India with the Brahmas there, that he said that God would never dream of demoting a human spirit into the body of an animal. And to say that was was like a bad teaching and a bad doctrine. So yeah. Anyway, so animals are animals and people are people, and animals go to heaven too, apparently. And if you love them on this earth, they want to see you in the afterlife. And so I found that to be very endearing. Some other commonalities: you meet your ancestors, potentially your pets, right? Then there's a spirit guide. Some people attribute this person to be Jesus. In some cases, it was female and someone they called mother, and they eventually realized it was Mother Mary of God, Jesus's mother from the Bible. Um, in some cases, it was a faceless voice and a touch on the shoulder, and they never saw who it was. Some described them, and often they were 30, about the age of 30, male, and some of them thought it was Jesus. Others thought it was somebody not like a human, but also not quite like Jesus, not as powerful as the head man there, and but more like an angel, for instance. At this point, they're taken on a tour. And this is at this point they leave the countryside and they emerge in a city, a gleaming city with buildings way bigger than you'd expect, huge buildings with huge rooms, right? Lots of happy people, typically dressed in some kind of plain tunic with a sash around the middle. Um, and they're milling about, apparently doing whatever people do. And this is often described as not necessarily your end destination, but rather a port of entry, a place where you become acclimated and all of your questions are answered. So one of the first stops in nearly all of these is what you would call the library. So they take them to the library. Some call this the library of souls. Other people who didn't know what they were seeing when they came out tend to when they return to their bodies, tend to do some research and decide that it was the Akashic records. But what's in the library is the actions, words, and deeds of every human being that ever lived. And the library is immense. Some say it contains books. In others, it contains books and scrolls, some in jars, some in shelves. And one thing that is common is there's these long row, as far as the eye can see, of tables. And in most cases, they're empty. In some versions, there's people sitting at them. And this is where you go to study history, your life, the lives of your ancestors, whatever interests you about the past. And apparently it contains the past, the present, and the future. Don't. Most of these people on tour were not allowed to sit down and really look through the library. And another section of this library might be called the halls of past lives. So you could go there and look at all of your incarnations. And that's one of the things that is not in every single one of these near-death experiences, but is in most of them, is the understanding that we are reincarnated over and over again in life. And that some of the people who, once it came to light that this was not their time, or they were given the choice to go back or to be reincarnated into another baby. And so another commonality between these is the understanding that we chose our life. So another part of this giant library is a place where life planning takes place. And some people were able to see other people making decisions about how they would be reincarnated and what family they would choose to be reincarnated into, what situation, what was offered them for choices, and they were allowed to make a choice of a few options, right? And a general understanding that before we are born, we tend to choose these lives that we live. And if someone lives a life of suffering, that's one of the things that came out of, I would say, the majority of these NDEs, is the understanding that a lot of people who have difficult lives chose them on purpose, because you can learn more from difficult lives, apparently, according to the NDEs. Once again, it's a coffee talk. These are other people's stories, right? And not all, but most of them are allowed to get to a certain point in this tour where they get to have a examination of their life. And this is where they are showed things where they negatively affected other people. And typically it starts out as some kind of pop-up screen that kind of turns into a hologram, and eventually at some point as you look at it, you become part of it and you relive it. And at first you live in that situation just like it occurred, and you relive the event, and you see the thing that you did that was shady or that was hurtful or that was selfish or in some way off, and you relive it, and you feel your emotions, your motivations, the struggle within you, and the event itself. And then you're transformed into the position of the other person, the victim of your misdeed. And now you get to feel them getting punched in the face or their feelings getting hurt as them, that you become them and you feel their pain. You feel their situation. You know what motivated them in that moment. And the shoe is most definitely on the other foot for sure. Don't judge a man until you walk a mile in their moccasins. The net result of this is generally a great deal of regret and some guilt. The guide, whoever he or she may be at this point, will often encourage the person that it's okay. This is not a punishment. You're not being judged. You're just here to experience this so that you learn from it. And these are lesson points in your life. And so they'll show you several of these, and often they also show you the transverse or reverse of that, the effect that your good deeds had on people. And they show that sometimes you might have done something in life that you thought was small and inconsequential, and you might compliment someone or give someone a smile or a handshake or a hug, and then you get to flip that and feel what it's like to receive that, and you get to know how much you had an effect on that person. Sorry, I tear up when I think about it. That you never know what life-changing emotions you're transferring to someone just from a simple act of kindness. And so something good you did for someone could change their life, change their perspective, warm their heart, and give them, literally in some cases, a reason to live. And so you get to see both your good and your bad deeds. This we might call judgment, but that's one thing that is very clear through all of this, that there's no judgmentalism. I think the one thing that is present in every single one of these near-death experiences is the understanding immediately upon crossing over that unconditional love envelops you on the other side, that God is love, that the meaning of life is love, that we are to love one another, just like Jesus said, once again, with the theme of this ministry. I don't talk about and lament on or even try to figure out who Jesus was or what his death meant. I have been focused on what he taught us. And the general theme of Jesus Christ is love your neighbor, love yourself, and love God. And this is the feeling that all of these people, regardless of what their life was like when they passed over, when they got to the other side, they all felt the same thing. God's eternal, everlasting love for us. Whether you call it the universe, whether you call it the collective, one thing is certain. It emulates this immense feeling of deep, compassionate love and caring and consideration. And they come away from this with the understanding that love is everything. Love conquers all. Love is the reason. Love is the reason for the season. Love is what Jesus is, and it's all about loving one another. No surprise to me as a Christian minister. I've been preaching love for a long time. It's good to get the confirmation, right? If that's true, it just goes hand in hand with what I already believe. And so the overall experience is one of enlightenment, knowledge. Apparently, everything that you can do on earth, you can do in heaven when you're in this, what do you want to call it? Orientation, that there's people there that cook and eat. You can go horseback riding. You can commune with the animals. You can do the things in life that you like to do, but over there, and it's all kind of the same, but it's better. Everything tastes better, smells better, feels better. It's life without care, worry, trouble, disease, sickness, fatigue. None of that exists on the other side. And that many people, the very physical feeling they get of being there, they describe as feeling more alive there and more real in that world than in this one. And they are full of energy, and some of them want to play like a child, just to run up a hill because they can, climb a tree because it's there, right? Frolic with the animals and the past pets and act like a child. And another thing I found interesting is that children who had NDEs almost all exclusively met Jesus. And not everyone meets Jesus. Everyone meets someone, but not necessarily the big guy himself. But children tend to meet Jesus. Jesus shows in these NDE experiences, Jesus shows a very distinct interest in engaging with kids, talking to the kids, and even playing with the children, which goes in character with Jesus as he was on this earth. And it reminds me of the song when I was a kid. Jesus loves the little children. So, although some of these people met faceless angels as their guide, some were guided part of the time by relatives and part of the time by these angelic creatures, and some people got to meet Jesus in person. And as far as how to view your past lives or have your life review of the life you had just been living, or even to look at the future of your life if you went back, there's different devices, one might say. Some are, like I said, one viewed it as a screen that turned into a hologram, that turned into an actual experience when you're reviewing this stuff, where you're physically there and all of your senses are alive. One viewed it as a chair in the middle of a big round room, and there were many screens on the ceiling looking down, and each one of those 20 or so screens were showing key days from their history of their life. And one lady was hers was very interesting. Hers was like a treasure box, and when she opened the top, it was filled with these little orbs like bubbles, and when she picked them up, there was a screen playing inside, and when she stared into the bubble, then she went into the bubble and relived, either through her perspective or the perspective of the other person in the memory. Very interesting stuff, right? It's been very entertaining. I don't see anything negative about this. I think it seems to have a positive message across the board. And in some of them, they show them the future of their life if they go back. Don't. Those weren't so pleasant. Those showed a future for our country of turmoil and war and natural disaster and financial collapse and everything that we've kind of been living through since before the big pandemic, since I guess things started going haywire about 2008 by my book, 2007, something like that. Which leads me to this television, actually a movie from 1991 called Defending Your Life. And I had to pay $2.99 to rent it, to review it. I'd seen it years ago. And it is, when I first saw that movie, I thought, what religion is this based on? Because it's kind of Christian, but it's kind of Buddhist. They talk about reincarnation. And it wasn't until I started researching near-death experiences before I realized that that movie is actually based on near-death experiences. So if you haven't seen the movie, here's a quick synopsis. It's the story of a average Joe who never went out of his way to be a great person or a good person, but also never gave in to being a bad person necessarily, and just kind of lived a normal average life. And he buys a new Mercedes, and when he's out enjoying it for the first day, he drops his cassette tape, and as he's digging around on the floor looking for it, he headlongs into a bus, and he wakes up being wheeled through a hospital-looking building in a wheelchair with hundreds and hundreds of other people, like an assembly line. And they come into an awaiting area. They get onto a tram that very much looks like the trams that they use to drive you around Disneyland back in the 70s or 80s to bring you into the park. I think there's one that drives through the park. And so the whole thing kind of feels like a mid-level resort from the 1980s in this movie. And in it, there's all-you-can-eat buffets because you can eat all you want without getting sick or getting fat or feeling bad or weighed down. So eating is a pastime. And everyone is on trial for their life in this television show, this movie, for 4 days. And during that 4 days, they look at somewhere between 4 and 14 days in your life. Apparently, the more numbers of days they look at, the less likely you are to make the cut. Like the near-death experiences, they're told there is no hell punishment, just simply a return to earth to try again. And at one point, the lead character asks his defense attorney, well, what happens if you just keep going back? You just get infinite chances? And he says, well, no. If you go back an unnormal amount of times, they can throw you away. And he described being thrown away sounds a bit like hell. Outer darkness, the end of everything, no interaction anymore. This is what happens if you just keep going back and you never learn your lesson and you take advantage of the situation, right? And apparently, according to this movie and these near-death experiences, and I can clearly see the movie religion is based on this near-death experience ideology. But eventually you can apparently go to hell, but only, it's not really a hell of punishments. It's a hell away from everything good, being rejected, thrown away, they call it. And that only happens to people who just don't ever learn, who just refuse to improve themselves. And that the whole purpose of life is to evolve, to become a better person, a more pure spirit, to become love. That the goal, I can say, across the board for all near-death experiences is the realization that our goal in life is to embody love, compassion, caring, empathy, and to have empathy for everyone and everything. And in that way, it resembles Buddhist oneism, being one, becoming one with the world, that we're all linked. And it does tie Buddhism and Jesus' teaching and this NDE all tied together in this idea that when you hurt someone else, you're really just hurting yourself because we're all connected. Like Jesus said, when you clothe the hungry, you clothe the naked, feed the hungry, visit people in prison, you're doing it for Jesus. That when you hurt someone else, you're really just hurting yourself because we're all one in Christ. We're all one in the afterlife. We're all connected. And that seems to be one of the major themes in near-death experiences, is the understanding that we're all connected and that war and conflict and competition is basically us just beating our own selves up, right? Which is not off the mark from what Jesus taught in Matthew 25, that when we treat other people wonderfully, we're treating Jesus wonderfully. And when we treat other people horribly, then we are treating Jesus horribly. And it links us all together. And part of that, of the judgment day, is understanding the effect that your behavior had on other people. Most of the time, people who have this experience don't want to go back. These experiences range in length from clear to the end here to where you get to review your life. You get to decide, and they give you the decision that you can go back to the life you came into and finish it, or you can choose a new life and be reincarnated, right? And others are shorter. Some are shorter. Some never make it out of the hospital room. Some only make it to the point where they meet their ancestors before they're turned around and sent back. Some are given the option to go back, and some are told to go back. You're not done here. This was not in the right timeline. You need to go back and finish your life. You have things to do. And people in those cases are often shown what it is that they're supposed to do when they get back, what their emphasis in life should be, the lesson or the impact that they need to have on the world when they return. I do find this all very interesting. The fact that these people come from varying walks of life, various religious backgrounds, from very religious to not religious at all. Some of them come back, denounce their church, take on a more kind of love-centered concept. They drop the whole idea of sin, death, hell, and the grave. One interesting expert I saw talk on this, in the course of her 1-hour discourse on this, she talked about how this ties to Nordic religion, how it ties to Hinduism, how it ties to Buddhism. And she gets to the end, and the interviewer asks her, so how do you live a good life? If you want to impress God, if you want to go up there and be celebrated and not reprimanded, if you want to go up there and get an A++, what do you do? What's the pathway? What's the best thing I can do? And even though this person had not through this entire thing talked much about Jesus. She just said this simple thing that I think sums it all up for me. She said, just live the life that Jesus told you to do. What Jesus taught and taught how to live the way Jesus taught you to live, and you're shoe in. It's that simple. Just do what Jesus taught. Just behave the way Jesus said to behave. And that is so not being taught in churches today. They're talking about how Paul told you to live, how the Old Testament told you how to live, how the prophets told you how to live, and they put Jesus up as a simple sacrifice, and they just skip over Jesus's teaching. But if you want to know what Jesus teaches, tune into the sheep pen here, because that's pretty much all we talk about. What did Jesus teach? How did he interact with people while he was alive? Not who he was as a sacrifice, not who he was to the Jews, not even who he was to the Godhead, but what was he trying to tell us? And this one researcher said that's the key to it all. That Jesus had, who would have thunk it? That when you got to the end of the rainbow, Jesus really is the answer. Jesus is the answer to the question in life, because Jesus talked about love. Jesus talked about forgiveness. Jesus talked about acceptance. Jesus talked about empathy, right? Jesus lived a life of sacrifice, a sacrificial love of others. Jesus operated in spiritual power. And so this is what it means for me to serve Jesus Christ. And for her to say that just kind of made my day and summed it all up. Do I think near-death experiences are real? I don't know. I guess I'll find out someday now, won't I? What do you think? There is the argument, and if you're going to give the argument of it's a chemical hallucination because you had all these different cocktail of chemicals dropped into your blood when you died, and this is the dying spasms of a dying brain, you're on the wrong channel. Go find an agnostic channel somewhere. We believe in the supernatural here. We believe in the afterlife. And just to throw a little shade on your theory, when you induce healthy people with these same cocktails of drugs artificially, they don't have any of these hallucinations. These hallucinations are peculiar only to those who are at or cross over death's door and brought back. There's two kinds of NDAs. NDAs? A near-death experience. NDEs. There's two types of these, the confirmed and unconfirmed. Confirmed are people that can say, the doctors told me that I was dead for 7, 8, 10, 12 minutes, whatever. Others are unconfirmed, where they believe they died, but they were at home, or they fell out in the shower, or they were laying in the street, and they don't know how long they were out or if they were dead at all before the EMTs got there. But they all almost sound like the same exact story with little variation. Tell me what you think in the comments section. Have you had a near-death experience? Has someone you loved had a near-death experience? Have you seen a dead relative? We want to hear about it in the comments section. And we'll see you next time on Coffee Talk. Don't forget to hit that PayPal. Keep the channel running. Keep the stories coming. And we'll see you next time on Coffee Talk.